case you haven't figured it out yet, the theme this month is journeys and travels in far distant places. And our guest speaker this month is Whittier Strong. He's a native of Indiana, lived here in the Twin Cities for 10 years, and is now pursuing his master's in creative writing in Fairbanks, Alaska. Let's see, what else do we got here? His writing has appeared in The Goodman Project, The Rumpus, and QDA, a Queer Disability Anthology, and other places as well. His thesis is about his time living here in the cities, but we don't know what all that's all about, so he's going to tell us about living in Alaska.
So when I was in 5th grade, my class was given an assignment. We were to draw addresses out of a box from the tourism boards of all the different states in the US. And I didn't have Alaska, but somebody else did, and they didn't want it, and so they traded me. And that began a lifelong obsession with the place. And so, when it came time for me to consider what my plans would be after I graduated from Metro State with a degree in creative writing, I put in applications to a number of MFA programs, and it came down to 2 schools: the University of Alaska-Fairbanks and Minnesota State Mankato. And I decided I can't move 90 miles down the road, or I can fly 3,000 miles away for a new adventure in my life. So all apologies, Mankato, but you ain't got mountains. Sorry about that. And I really didn't know what I was getting into moving into Fairbanks. I had these perceptions that it was in the middle of the tundra. There were no trees anywhere. I thought that there was ice on the ground, maybe 10 months out of the year, maybe. I thought I would be eaten by a bear by the time my program ended. And fortunately, none of that stuff came about. But living there is kind of like living in another country, and kind of like living on another planet. And so that's kind of where I'm going with it. I'm thinking just how very different of a place it is, and how unlike what you might think it is, actually is. Pop quiz. Where does the sun rise?
In the southeast.
In the southeast? What did I hear? In the east?
It doesn't rise, it's always where it is.
Here's it. Okay, so y'all are wrong. Because in Fairbanks, Alaska, in the wintertime, the sun, no. That's one myth I'm going to debunk here. Because Fairbanks is south of the Arctic Circle by about 120 miles. And that makes a huge difference in terms of the angle of the sun, because you see at the top of the world there, a small different distance makes a big difference in terms of the angle that the sun is coming in at. So Fairbanks is south of the Arctic Circle. On the shortest day of the year, the sun is up, rising in the south and setting in the south for 2 hours a day on the shortest day of the year.
2 hours.
But, and this is what's going to blow your mind, you get 5 hours of daylight on the shortest day of the year. Because the other relationship between the sun and the Arctic regions is that the sun comes in at an oblique angle year-round. So you get a very long dawn and a very long dusk year-round. So if the sun is rising and setting in the south in the wintertime, it is rising and setting in the north in the summertime. And remember that thing I said about the extra hours of dawn and dusk? This is the effect it has in Fairbanks. The sun is technically down for 2 hours on the longest day of the year. But you get the dawn and dusk. And what you end up with is about 3.5 months straight of daylight. And last summer, I learned I absolutely hate it, so that's why I'm here this summer. So yeah, this stuff with the sun makes you feel like you're on another planet. And to be able to take a walk, and every time you go out, you see vegetation that you have no idea what it is. And you're probably not going to get it without some sort of field manual, because you weren't raised with these plants. Notice, not tundra, okay? Lots of trees and bushes everywhere around Fairbanks, right? But it makes every trip out your door a discovery. And you might discover a moose. I've had 3 encounters with a moose. One was as I was coming back from a party. We were driving back, and the moose was just ambling along the side of the road on the other side. Number 1. Number 2 was this glorious spring morning when I looked out my window, the 3rd story of my apartment building, just on the other side of the street, bam, moose. The 3rd encounter was in a bowl of moose soup, and my gosh, it was delicious. So yeah, encountering wildlife you don't expect. Now, another natural phenomenon I want to touch on is not the one you think I'm going to do. I bet you think I'm going to bring up the aurora borealis at some point. It's just green stuff in the sky, okay? Let me tell you about another thing with a very fancy Latin name, and that is the Fata Morgana. Now, to set it up, you have to understand that south of Fairbanks, it is perfectly flat for about 150 miles. And then you get to the highest mountain range in North America. Now, at this extreme northern latitude, there is an optical illusion that can come about called the Fata Morgana. And basically what it does, it affects the perception of the mountains on the horizon so that they look bigger and closer than they actually are. And it's not even consistent. Some days it's bigger than others. When I've seen it at its height, I swear I thought I was in Mordor. All right? It is that trippy. So that gets at some of the nature in and around Fairbanks. And to be honest, that's all I've seen of the state. You gotta remember, Alaska is twice the size of Texas. And in terms of its east to west distance, it's equal to going from the east coast to the west coast. It is that big and that diverse in terms of climate, in terms of geology, vegetation, and people.
Not very nice.
Not very many, that is a good point. So this is what it looks like. You take the populations of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington, and St. Louis Park. Those 4 cities. Now, spread them over an area twice the size of Texas. Take half of that population and put it in just 3 cities. And outside of those cities, and by big cities, I'm talking, set like 250,000, 80,000, 30,000. Those are the 3 big cities, okay? From there, it drops very quickly into villages of a couple hundred people. So, yeah, the culture, because we're so spread out and so ethnically diverse, racially diverse, all of this makes for a very different place. I want to talk about the one Alaskan I heard about to no end when I told all the fine Minnesotans that I was headed to Alaska. Oh, you're going to say hi to Sarah Palin, aren't you? And it was all very ironic, given that this was coming from people in a state that kept re-electing Michelle Bachmann. Now that is as political as I'm going to get here, because I want to draw attention to something that Sarah Palin is unfortunately and misguidedly and mistakenly noted. Perhaps the #1 quote that people associate with her is saying that she could see Russia out her house. She never said that. It came from a Tina Fey sketch on Saturday Night Live. And that sketch was parodying a response that she gave to an interviewer when asked about her foreign policy credentials. And she responded by talking about Alaska's proximity to Russia and the various ways that the state engages with the Russian people. And this is entirely accurate. All of the countries in the Arctic region, so we're talking the US, Alaska, Canada, Russia, and the Scandinavian nations, are all very much involved in Arctic research, in Arctic anthropology. There are a lot of colloquiums and consortiums across the universities in that region of the world. Furthermore, you have to take into account that Alaska in the era of colonization was originally a Russian colony. And as a result, 1 out of 8 Alaskans is Russian Orthodox Christian. So, yeah, so I got to a little bit of debunking there. And I think the single most important thing that I can say about Alaska is that there are 2 very different cultures there. Now, there's more than 2, but there are 2 dominant cultures. You have white Alaska and native Alaska. White Alaska is made up mostly of people who have been there no more than 2 or 3 generations. They are very friendly, very extroverted, very open, very non-Minnesota. And it's born, that attitude, that openness, that constant advice giving is born out of moving into a hostile climate in a hostile region where if you're really stupid, a bear might eat you. Now, I want to clarify, the bears are generally more in trouble from people than the other way around. But the flip side of that openness and that connection is that people are fiercely independent, the white Alaskans. People move to Alaska because they want to do their own thing without interference or disruption, or people saying, no, you can't do that. You can't dye your hair purple, that looks ridiculous. And yeah, actually dyeing your hair crazy colors is really common there. So yeah, white Alaska, very independent. Native Alaska, very interdependent. And I didn't come to understand this until this past year when I began working as a tutor in rural student services with the university. And this branch of the university works primarily, well, rural student service. It's not exactly the kind of a euphemism for Alaska natives. And the Alaska Native culture is in many ways in sharp contrast to white Alaska culture. There is a very strong focus on community. Most everyone, the people who live off by themselves and might get eaten by a bear, those are the white Alaskans. Native Alaskans live in small villages predominantly. Some live in the cities. Fairbanks is about 20% native, but primarily the Alaska Native population lives in rural villages, 50, 100, 200 people. And because of that, there is very much an understanding of needing to rely on each other and looking out for each other and taking care of each other. But it's a double-edged sword there as well, because there is so much a focus on putting the needs of the community ahead of your own that you might neglect your own needs. And that is one of the things that we work with our students in rural student services. They don't usually, we don't have it set up where they just sign up for a tutorial. We immerse ourselves in, as tutors, immerse ourselves in their community by engaging in their different social events and such like that. That helps build up trust. And oftentimes, a student will come to us because their advisor from Rural Student Services is bringing the student to us. The student is not likely to ask for help because doing so puts their needs above the needs of the community. So you can look at white Alaska and Native Alaska and see that there are pluses and minuses to both cultures. And yet, I feel like I have benefited greatly by participating in both. And that by pursuing a balance of both approaches to life, developing greater independence and inner fortitude, whilst also developing community and interdependence, you end up with a balanced and healthy view of life that I think all of us, the world round, would do best to follow. So that is just a taste of my adventures in Alaska. I have one more year there to finish my degree. I do not plan to stay, strictly for economic reasons. The white Alaskans, they've built the entire economy on one commodity, which is oil. And y'all have been enjoying those wonderfully cheap gas prices. We don't think they're so wonderful in Alaska.
No.
So, but I will always be grateful for my experience there and will always cherish the place. And I hope you all get the chance to check it out if ever you can.
Did you notice the difference between the mountain, the natives call it Denali, and the whites call it Mount McKinley?
Whites down here.
Oh,
Mount McKinley. Let us be clear.
yeah.
Alaskans have been fighting Congress for 40 years
That long.
to get the name properly marked as Denali, and only got it passed last year.
Wow. Wow.
I'll take another question or two.
How long do you have to live there before you qualify for their oil royalty?
So it's called the Permanent Fund Dividend.
A what?
It's called the Permanent Fund Dividend.
Okay.
You have to live there 1 calendar year, and you get it the October after.
Oh.
So I'm heading into my 3rd year of school, and this is the 1 year I will actually get it, calendar year. But it was a record high last year, so I ain't gonna complain. One more.
How much was it?
The PFD last year was over $2,000. That was highly unusual. It can be as low as $300. It's complicated. It's tied to not the oil prices, but the stock prices of the oil companies. And there's about a 5-year delay on the effects of the stock market on the permanent fund dividend.
Wow.
So yeah, hopefully I'll be $2,000 richer this year. All right.
That'll help.
All right, one more.
I'm sorry. Given that global warming impacts Alaska in a much more visible way than it does most of the rest of the country, and despite the fact that it's a very Republican state, is there greater acceptance of the reality of global warming in Alaska?
So I want to break that down at a couple of points. First off, it's not exactly fair to characterize Alaska as a hard Republican state. It really is a place that doesn't quite fit America politically. Our current governor is an independent who broke ranks from the Republican Party for feeling it was too conservative. Alaska, I believe, is the only state that has sent a libertarian to Congress. It's a place that just a little different politically. The Fairbanks borough, so not the city, but the surrounding, the whole borough, which is, by the way, the size of New Jersey, contains both the most liberal voting bloc and the most conservative voting bloc in the state.
Wow.
So there's half of that. The other thing I want to say is that the realities of climate change are very obvious. These days, Fairbanks, and for most of the year, the climate is comparable to here. In the wintertime, it is often warmer there than here. I don't want to hear that. But that was not the case even 10 or 15 years ago.
Right.
The climate changes are most dramatic in the Arctic. There are native villages along the coast that are having to relocate, like as of next year, because the permafrost is thawing.
The permafrost.
And it's causing the villages to sink. People are very aware of it, but the influence of the oil companies is very powerful. Like I said, white Alaskans have built the entire state economy on it. And therefore, the oil companies have more say than the political parties and the politicians. So you'll often run into this big disjunct. Yeah, things are very obviously wrong here, but I also need to feed my family, right? My personal opinion would be if the culture shifted more to a native approach, the state economy would be both more diversified and more localized, focusing on what materials are there than this gigantic carbon footprint you have living there, having absolutely everything, almost everything shipped to you from down here.
So you could be their second libertarian candidate.
No, green, sorry. Yes?
So you said that if it was more of a native economy from your perspective, you had more diversified economy of resources. What resources are we talking about? Timber, biological, fish, fishing?
Yeah, fish definitely, timber definitely. It would be interesting to see the tourism industry reimagined to favor Native people. As it is, there's a huge market in fake Alaska Native art created by white Alaskans.
Wow.
And it's tragic, you know. I make jewelry. There are certain jewelry styles I will not do because I don't want to cut into what the Alaska Natives are doing in their jewelry design.
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to wrap it up there. I'll be around for a couple, I'll be around for just a few minutes afterwards and then I'm heading out. But thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.